The moment she said it, the air in the room changed. I'd heard plenty of thoughtless things in my life, but never those exact words, never from her, and never into a microphone in front of nearly 100 people. My granddaughter, my sweet little girl who used to run to my arms at every school play, looked out over her friends, grinning, and announced, "Grandma is so embarrassing she should leave." Some of the kids laughed. Some adults laughed too, the kind of laugh that isn't really about humor. It's about joining the pack so you don't feel out of place. I didn't laugh. I stood there, holding a plastic cup of lemonade, staring at a child I thought I knew. You don't forget a moment like that, and you don't come back from it, not without something breaking. My name is Margaret Lane. I'm 72 years old, and I've lived long enough to know that life doesn't hand out dignity. You have to hold on to it yourself. I was married for 42 years to a man named Daniel. We built a modest but good life in our small town. We raised one daughter, Emily, and when Daniel passed 10 years ago, I poured everything I had into her and her daughter, Lily, my only grandchild. People talk about the golden years as if they're a peaceful glide into the sunset. But for a lot of us, they're years of adjusting, figuring out who you are without the job, the spouse, the daily routines that made you feel needed. For me, Lily filled that space. She was the light in my quiet house. I watched her after school while her mother worked, helped with homework, sewed her Halloween costumes, birthdays, recitals, scraped knees. I was there for all of it. And I'll be honest, I spoiled her. I wanted her to have everything. Maybe it was because I remembered how little we had when Emily was growing up. Maybe it was guilt for the times I couldn't protect Emily from life's hardships. Or maybe I just couldn't say no to those big brown eyes. So when Emily came to me 6 months ago and said they wanted to throw Lily a sweet 16, like in the movies, I didn't hesitate. I knew it would be expensive, and Emily didn't have that kind of money. I offered before she even asked. $12,000 was a lot for me, more than I'd ever spent on a single event. But I told myself this was a once-in-a-lifetime milestone. That money came out of my savings, the same savings I've always kept for family needs. I'd been slowly adding to it for years, not just for birthdays or weddings, but for Lily's college. I wanted her to have the head start I never had. In the weeks leading up to the party, I stayed busy with details. I worked with the caterer, checked on the cake order, even spent 2 afternoons helping string lights at the venue. Lily's friends came over to plan outfits and music, and I'd hear them in the kitchen talking about how amazing the night was going to be. She'd barely acknowledge me when I passed through. I told myself it was normal. Teenagers have their own worlds. But looking back, there were cracks I didn't want to see. Comments like, "Grandma, don't wear anything old-fashioned," or "maybe just sit in the back so my friends don't feel weird." She said them with a laugh, but each one left a mark. Emily didn't correct her. Sometimes she'd even laugh along. And still, I clung to the picture in my head. Lily smiling under the lights, coming over to hug me, maybe even giving me a little speech of thanks for making it all possible. That was the story I told myself as I zipped up my best navy blue dress the night of the party. I pinned my hair up the way Daniel always liked, put on the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 25th anniversary, and told myself this was going to be a happy night. I didn't know that within a few hours I'd be walking out of that venue with my head high, my heart heavy, and the decision made to change Lily's life in a way she'd never forget. The thing about spending a large sum of money on someone you love is that it rarely feels like spending it all, at least not at first. Each deposit, each check, each swipe of my card felt more like an act of devotion than a subtraction from my savings. I didn't tell Lily the total cost. Teenagers don't always grasp the weight of $1, and I didn't want her to feel pressured. But I kept track in a little spiral notebook in my kitchen drawer. Venue rental, $3,800. Catering, $2,400. DJ and lighting, $1,500. Custom cake shaped like a quilted Tiffany blue gift box, $800. invitations, decorations, and party favors, another $1,200. It was astonishing how quickly the numbers climbed. Emily offered to help with the invitations, which in practice meant handing me a list of guests and having me pay for custom gold foil printing. "You know how important it is that it looks high-end," she said, and I bit my tongue. She had a way of speaking as though the money just appeared, as though I hadn't spent decades making do, budgeting and putting away a little at a time for exactly these family moments. I told myself this was love. In the weeks before the party, I found myself in the role of silent organizer. I booked the florist to create those dramatic white rose centerpieces Lily had circled in a bridal magazine. Never mind that it was a sweet 16, not a wedding. I made sure the dance floor was polished, the lighting warm but flattering, and the food menu had enough variety to please picky teenage palates and more sophisticated adult tastes. Lily seemed to have slipped into a world I wasn't quite invited into. When I'd ask her about her dress or how she was feeling, she'd answer with distracted one-liners, eyes glued to her phone. "It's fine, Grandma. I've got it handled." I reminded myself she was busy. School, friends, the social whirlwind of being almost an adult. One afternoon, a week before the party, I stopped by Emily's to drop off the last payment receipt for the DJ. Lily was in the living room with two of her friends giggling over something on a tablet. I heard my name mentioned, followed by muffled laughter. When I stepped in, they went quiet. Lily smiled, but it was the polite, closed-mouth smile you give a stranger. "Grandma, could you maybe not wear that shawl thing you always wear?" she said lightly. "It's just, you know, I want the photos to look modern." Her friends smirked into their hands. I forced a smile and said, "I'll find something suitable." But inside, the comment stung. Daniel had given me that shawl years ago, and I wore it on special occasions like a kind of quiet tribute. That night, while I hemmed the hemline of my dress, I thought about the differences between Lily at 5 years old, when she'd twirl in anything I made her, and Lily at 16, when my taste seemed to embarrass her. I told myself she'd grow out of it. On the day before the party, I arrived at the venue early to oversee setup. The staff was polite, calling me ma'am and asking where to place the tables. I ran my fingers over the satin tablecloths, checking for wrinkles, straightened the silverware, and made sure the centerpiece candles were fresh. Emily breezed in around noon, sunglasses perched on her head, coffee in hand. "Wow, you've been busy," she said, glancing around. "It's looking decent." "Decent?" I raised an eyebrow, half joking. She laughed and said, "Don't take it personally, Mom. Lily's the one it has to impress." Then she drifted off to take a phone call. I watched her from across the room, and for a moment I felt a pang of something I didn't want to name. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the realization that I was doing more than just financing this night. I was making it happen. By the time I went home that evening, my feet ached and my back was tight from bending over tables and boxes. But there was a kind of satisfaction, too. I told myself that tomorrow, when Lily walked in and saw the place glowing like a dream, she'd understand. Maybe she wouldn't say it out loud, but she'd feel it. I clung to that thought like a promise. The evening of the party arrived with one of those soft spring twilights. Cool air, a pale pink sky fading into lavender. I took my time getting ready, not out of vanity, but because I wanted to feel right. I chose my best navy blue dress, the one that skimmed my figure without clinging, paired with the pearl earrings Daniel had given me. I left the shawl folded carefully in my closet, even though it hurt to do so. When I arrived at the venue, the parking lot was already half full. Music pulsed faintly through the walls, and the chatter of early guests spilled into the entrance. Inside, the room looked just as I'd imagined. Tables glittering under candlelight, the dance floor shining like glass, those white rose centerpieces towering in elegance. It should have felt magical. Emily was near the front, speaking to the DJ. She turned, gave me a quick once-over, and said, "You look nice, Mom. Try to mingle a bit, okay? Don't just sit at one table all night." Her tone was light, but the subtext was clear. Don't make it awkward." I smiled politely and told her I would. Lily was across the room with a circle of her friends. She wore a pale champagne dress that caught the light like spun sugar, her hair swept into soft curls. She looked beautiful. For a moment, I felt my chest tighten with pride. I waited for her to see me. She didn't. She was laughing at something one of the boys said, adjusting the silver bracelet on her wrist. I stepped closer, but before I could greet her, one of her friends leaned in and whispered something that made her laugh again. Then they drifted toward the photo backdrop, their laughter trailing behind them. I told myself she was busy, that the night was just beginning. Guests continued to pour in, neighbors I'd known for decades, friends from Emily's work, Lily's classmates and their parents. Some greeted me warmly, thanking me for helping make the night possible. Others glanced over me quickly, clearly here for their own kids' enjoyment. I found a table near the middle where I could see both the entrance and the dance floor. I sat with a couple I knew from the community center, exchanging small talk about the weather, upcoming events, anything but the fact that this was my granddaughter's milestone. Every so often, I'd glance toward Lily. She was radiant in the way only 16-year-olds can be. Effortless, glowing, the center of attention, but she never once made her way to my table. Emily bustled past at one point, muttering about the caterer forgetting the extra dessert trays. I asked if she needed help, but she shook her head and said, "Just enjoy yourself." The words felt hollow. Half an hour in, the DJ announced that dinner would be served shortly, and I noticed where the main table was set, front and center, just below the stage. Emily and Lily sat there with a small group of close friends and family. My place card was nowhere in sight. I checked my table again. Yes, my name was there, neatly printed, but I was surrounded by neighbors and a distant cousin I barely saw twice a year. I wasn't angry, not yet, just puzzled, a little hurt. Dinner passed without much fanfare. The food was good and I made conversation, but there was an undercurrent in the room I couldn't shake. It was as if I'd become part of the scenery, there but unnoticed. Then came the announcement for speeches. I straightened in my chair, expecting Emily to thank the guests, maybe acknowledge my contribution. I'd rehearsed in my head how I might respond if Lily gave me a special mention. The DJ called Lily to the microphone first. She glided up to the stage, smiling at the crowd. Phones came up to record her. She adjusted the mic, cleared her throat, and began with light-hearted jokes about turning 16, about how her friends had helped her survive the drama of high school. I was still smiling when her eyes flicked briefly toward me. And then she said it. The room had that kind of expectant hush, the one that comes before you think you're about to hear something meaningful. Lily looked perfectly at ease on the small stage, shoulders back, one hand wrapped lightly around the mic, the other gesturing as she spoke. She started with a few lines thanking her friends for always being there, and her mom for making this night happen. That line landed like a pebble in my stomach. I waited for the "and my grandma who made it possible." It didn't come. Instead, she launched into playful jabs about her friends' inside jokes, mimicking teachers and recounting how she'd survived the stress of planning. The crowd laughed in all the right places. I even smiled at a few of the stories. I kept telling myself, any second now she'll turn serious and thank me. Then I noticed her friend Emily. That's another Emily, one of her closest classmates. Whisper something into her ear from just off stage. Lily grinned wider, leaned closer to the mic, and her voice took on that exaggerated, teasing tone that teenagers use when they're trying to impress a crowd. "And of course," she said, scanning the audience until her eyes found mine, "my grandma is here tonight. Well," she gave a little chuckle, glancing at her friends. "She's so embarrassing she should leave before I do something cringy." The room erupted in a mixed reaction. Half laughs, half that awkward shifting when people aren't sure if something is a joke. My table mates glanced at me quickly, then away. Someone at the main table actually covered their mouth to hide a smirk. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but my body stayed perfectly still. No smile, no frown, just still. I'd learned a long time ago that the worst thing you can do in a moment like that is give them a reaction. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my daughter, Emily, lean back in her chair, a faint grin on her lips. She didn't correct Lily, she didn't even look at me. The DJ laughed nervously into his mic, as if to smooth it over, and Lily moved on to her next line like nothing had happened. But I wasn't listening anymore. In that moment, all the noise, the clinking glasses, the shuffling feet, the muffled laughter, faded into something distant and hollow. What stayed sharp and clear was the realization that this wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was my granddaughter, on a stage I'd paid for, in a dress I'd contributed to, using her moment in the spotlight to make me the punchline. Something inside me settled. Not in a defeated way, more like the way dust settles after you've slammed a door. A choice was taking shape in my mind, and once it was there, I knew it was permanent. I didn't stand up right away. No, leaving in a rush would have made it look like she'd gotten under my skin. And truthfully, she had, but not in the way she thought. I took a slow sip of my lemonade, let her voice fade into the background, and waited until she'd moved on to her next story. Only then did I reach down, unhook my small clutch from the chair, and set my napkin neatly on the table. "Margaret," the woman beside me murmured, half standing as if to help. I gave her a faint smile and shook my head. "I'm fine, dear, just need some air." I stepped out from the table into the open space between the guests and the exit. Conversations dimmed. Not everyone noticed, but the ones who did, they watched. I saw a few eyes widen. One man's gaze flicked from me to the stage as if piecing something together. I didn't look at Lily again. I didn't give her the satisfaction of my expression, but I did see from the corner of my eye her posture shift, just a fraction, when she realized I was heading for the door. Emily noticed too. She leaned forward slightly as if to say something, but then leaned back, her face unreadable. The music swelled again as the DJ tried to fill the space. The scent of roses and catered pasta followed me toward the glass doors. I could feel the beat of my own pulse in my ears, not from embarrassment, but from the steadiness of what I was about to do. When I reached the doors, the cool evening air swept over me. For a moment, I just stood there on the sidewalk, breathing it in. The laughter and music were muffled now, like they belonged to another world entirely. I walked to my car, my heels clicking against the pavement, and unlocked the door with a quiet, deliberate motion. Once inside, I didn't start the engine right away. My phone was in my lap, the black screen reflecting my face. Calm, composed, older than I felt just a few hours ago. I scrolled to the number for my financial advisor. He was at home, Friday night, but he answered on the second ring. "Margaret, everything all right?" "Yes," I said evenly, "but I need to make an immediate change to one of the accounts. The college trust fund for Lily Lane, close it. Transfer the balance back into my personal account." There was a pause. "All of it?" "All of it." I gave him the authorization codes and listened as he confirmed the closure. It was done before I'd even left the parking lot. When I ended the call, I sat there for another minute, watching the venue's entrance through the windshield. The lights above the door glowed warm against the darkening sky. People were still arriving, oblivious, laughing, holding wrapped gifts. They had no idea that the future Lily had counted on had just vanished. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt in the same way I had been a half hour ago. What I felt was settled, steady, like I'd finally drawn a line no one could cross without consequence. I started the car, backed out slowly, and drove away without looking back. Somewhere inside, I knew this wasn't the last conversation we'd have about tonight, but the next one would be on my terms. I didn't drive straight home. Halfway down the street from the venue, I pulled into a quiet cul-de-sac and parked under a dim streetlight. The silence in the car was heavy, the kind of stillness that lets every thought land like a stone in water. I rested my hands on the steering wheel, not gripping, just holding, like I needed something to anchor me. For a moment, I let myself replay the scene, the laughter, the words, the absence of anyone stepping in to soften the blow. It wasn't just Lily's voice I heard. It was the echo of every time I'd been quietly dismissed over the last few years. I thought about the mornings I'd driven her to early soccer practice in the rain just so Emily could sleep in. The afternoons I'd skip my own doctor's appointments to watch her when the babysitter canceled. The nights I'd stayed up baking cupcakes for her school events because Emily had too much on her plate. And then the bigger things, like the trust fund. That account wasn't a gift I'd decided on lightly. It had been born out of years of discipline. I'd added to it steadily since Lily was 6 years old, setting aside small amounts each month, sometimes skipping things for myself so it could grow. Over time, it became more than money. It was a promise. A promise I now realized she didn't value. I thought about how, in her mind, I was probably just there, a background character, reliable, unshakable, the safe person to joke about because she assumed I'd never take offense. She'd grown up in a world where my sacrifices were invisible, where $12,000 could be poured into a single night and still be taken for granted. I wasn't naive. Teenagers can be careless. But this felt different. It was public. It was deliberate. And it was a choice she made in front of her friends. I wasn't interested in revenge for the sake of cruelty. That's never been who I am. But I do believe in consequences, real ones that leave an imprint. Words are forgotten. Loss isn't. So I made my second call. And not to Emily, not to Lily. I called my attorney, Paul Simmons, a man I've known since Daniel and I bought our first home. He picked up on the third ring, his voice low and warm. "Margaret, what's wrong?" "Nothing wrong," I said, steady as stone, "but I want to update my will, effective immediately." I told him I wanted Lily's trust fund removed entirely from my estate planning, that the money would be redirected into a scholarship fund at the local community college, one specifically for first-generation students who had no family to help them. Paul was quiet for a moment. "Margaret, that's a big step." "It's the right one," I said. "She'll still have a roof over her head. She has every opportunity in the world, but she won't have that money. I want it to go to someone who understands what it means to be given a chance." We agreed to meet Monday morning to sign the necessary amendments. By the time I hung up, the decision was no longer just an impulse. It was an action already in motion. I sat there in the stillness a few minutes longer, looking at the glow of the venue in the distance. Somewhere in there, they were probably cutting the cake, taking photos, dancing. Lily was laughing without the faintest idea that the ground under her had shifted. When I finally started the car again, I didn't feel like a villain. I felt like someone reclaiming her own worth. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that when the reckoning came, I would not flinch. The next morning, I was up early, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of strong coffee. The quiet was almost luxurious after the noise of the night before. The sunlight spilled across the table, warming the wood, and for a moment, it felt like any ordinary Saturday. It didn't take long for the phone to break that peace. Emily's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," she began, her voice clipped. "What happened last night? You just left. Lily said you didn't even say goodbye." I took a slow sip of coffee. "That's correct." A pause. "Why?" I could hear the tension in her voice, the way she wanted me to hand her an easy explanation so she could file it away as a misunderstanding. "Because," I said, calm and measured, "I don't stay where I'm not wanted." "Mom, she was joking." "No," I cut in, my tone still even. "She was showing off, and you sat there and let her." Emily let out a breath through her nose. "You're overreacting. She's 16. They say dumb things. You don't just walk out and make it a scene." "I didn't make a scene," I replied. "I removed myself from one." That was when her voice shifted from defensive to sharp. "Well, she's going to apologize, but there's something else. Her college fund is showing as closed. Did you—" "Yes." The silence on the line was thick enough to taste. Then, incredulously, "You took away her future because of one comment?" "No," I said. I took away money I earned and saved because she made it very clear she doesn't respect me. Respect comes first. Opportunities come after. Emily's voice rose. You can't just... I can, I said, and I did. It was my money, my choice. She can still go to college. She'll just have to work for it, like most people do. The next voice I heard wasn't Emily's. It was Lily's in the background, sharp and panicked. Ask her if she can put it back. Tell her I didn't mean it. Emily must have handed her the phone, because suddenly, Lily was on the line. Grandma, I'm sorry, okay? I was just trying to be funny. Everyone laughed. I didn't think you'd, do something like this. I could hear the tremor in her voice. Not sorrow, not yet, just fear of losing what she thought was guaranteed. You didn't think I'd have a limit, I said softly. Now you know I do. But that's for my future. Then maybe you'll treat people who care about you as part of your future, I said. Not as the punchline to a joke. Her voice cracked. You're ruining my life. No, I said gently. I'm making sure you don't ruin your own. I ended the call before she could say anything else. My hands were steady. My coffee had gone lukewarm, but I drank the rest anyway. Over the next few hours, the text messages started. Some from Emily, accusing, angry, calling me cold-hearted. Some from relatives, half demanding I reconsider, half saying, good for you. A cousin even sent me a short message, about time someone taught her manners. I didn't reply to any of them. By late afternoon, the calls slowed. The house was quiet again, but I knew this was just the first wave. The real fallout was coming, not just from them, but from the wider circle of people who would hear about what I'd done. And for the first time in a long while, I found myself looking forward to the moment they realized I wasn't going to fold. By Sunday morning, the story had traveled faster than I'd expected. I should have known it would. Small towns have a way of turning personal matters into public sport. It started at church. I'd barely stepped through the doors when I felt the shift in the air, those quick glances, the almost silent pauses in conversation. Mrs. Lang, who's been my friend since we were both newlyweds, caught me by the arm as I made my way down the aisle. Margaret, she said, eyes narrowing in that way that means she's concerned but also a little impressed. Is it true you canceled Lily's college fund? I met her gaze evenly. It is. Her lips pursed, then curved into the smallest of smiles. Good. Children need to learn there's a limit to disrespect. She patted my arm before heading to her seat. Not everyone was so approving. After the service, a woman I've known for decades, more Emily's friend than mine, pulled me aside near the coffee urn. I heard what happened, she said in a tone dripping with moral superiority. She's just a child, Margaret. You can't punish her future for one mistake. I stirred cream into my coffee without looking up. Her future will be just fine. She'll simply have to build it herself. By Monday, it had moved beyond the church crowd. At the grocery store, I overheard two women in the produce aisle whispering my name. One of them caught my eye and quickly busied herself with the apples. At the post office, an old acquaintance cornered me and asked if I'd really meant to be so harsh. I realized then that, to some people, money given to family is no longer yours. Once you've earmarked it, they believe it belongs to the recipient, no matter their behavior. That was never my view. I'd worked too long, budgeted too carefully to see it that way. Meanwhile, my phone kept lighting up. Emily called twice more that week, each time cycling through anger, guilt-tripping, and pleading. She's already telling her friends she might not be able to go to her dream school. Is that really what you want? I didn't waver. What I want, I told her, is for her to understand that gratitude and respect are not optional. If that lesson comes before she sets foot on a campus, she'll be better for it. The texts from Lily were more sporadic, a few one-liners. I said I'm sorry, or can't we just forget it? Each one sounding more like an attempt to undo the consequence than to address the wound. I answered only once. Some things can't be forgotten. They can only be learned from. Then there were the quiet supporters. My neighbor, Thomas, stopped me while I was tending my roses. Heard you stood your ground, he said, leaning on the fence between our yards. Good, Kids these days think money falls out of the sky. Maybe she'll think twice next time. Even the librarian, a gentle woman who rarely involves herself in gossip, slipped me a note with my checked out books. It said, "Holding the line is the hardest kindness there is." Those moments mattered. They reminded me that not everyone saw discipline as cruelty. Still, there was a heaviness that lingered in my chest. I wasn't blind to the fact that my choice would shape the way Lily saw me for a long time. But I also knew bending now would teach her something far worse, that no matter how she treated people, the rewards would keep coming. By the end of that week, the initial shock had settled into something else, a sort of uneasy truce. They'd stopped calling as often, but I could feel the undercurrent. Emily and Lily were waiting for the moment I'd soften. They didn't realize that moment would never come. It was almost 2 weeks before I saw Lily again. Not a call, not a visit, just those half-hearted texts that trailed off when I didn't take the bait. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, she was standing there, arms folded, shifting from foot to foot. The cool March air had turned her cheeks pink, and for the first time in a long time, she looked young. Not the poised, camera-ready girl from her party, but a 16-year-old who'd been told no and didn't know what to do with it. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. I stepped aside and led her into the living room. She dropped her backpack on the floor and sank into the couch like she was bracing for impact. "I'm sorry," she began quickly. "I shouldn't have said what I said at the party. I was trying to be funny, but it came out wrong." I sat in my armchair across from her, hands resting in my lap. "It didn't just come out wrong, Lily. You meant for it to get a laugh. And it did. At my expense." She looked down at her lap. "I wasn't thinking." "No," I said. "You were thinking about what your friends would think of you, and that mattered more to you than how you treated me." She glanced up then, and there it was. That mix of guilt and frustration teenagers get when they're caught between wanting forgiveness and not wanting to admit the depth of their mistake. She started, then stopped. "I just didn't think you'd, you know, take my college money away over it." "Exactly," I said. "You didn't think I'd ever have a line you couldn't cross. That's the problem." She leaned back, arms crossed again, as if pulling her feelings back inside. "So what? That's it? You're just gonna let me fail?" I took a slow breath. "Lily, you have a roof over your head. You have food, clothes, access to a good school. You have every opportunity in the world to work hard, apply for scholarships, get part-time jobs. I'm not taking away your future. I'm giving you a chance to value it." Her eyes filled with frustrated tears. "But it's harder now." I nodded. "Yes, it is. And sometimes the hardest lessons are the only ones that stick." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The ticking clock on the wall seemed louder in the silence. Finally, she said, "So there's nothing I can do?" I thought about it. "You can show me who you really want to be, not with words, but with actions. Over time. Trust and respect are earned, Lily, not bought." She looked at me like I'd just handed her a foreign language. "So you're saying if I'm, like, perfect for the next few months, you'll give it back?" I shook my head. "I'm saying this isn't about a reward. It's about the kind of person you decide to be from here on out. Whether or not you ever see that money again is irrelevant. What matters is whether you become someone who would never think to humiliate the people who love her." Her mouth tightened. "That's harsh." "It's honest," I said quietly. She picked up her backpack, muttered something I didn't catch, and headed for the door. She didn't slam it, but she didn't look back either. When she was gone, I sat there for a long while, staring at the dent in the couch cushion where she'd been. Part of me hoped she'd understand someday. The other part knew that day might not come soon, or at all. Either way, I wasn't going to move the line I'd drawn. It started small, so small I almost didn't notice. The week after our talk, I saw Lily's name pop up on my phone, not as a call, but as a text that simply read, "Do you need anything from the store?" I stared at it for a good minute, wondering if it was her way of bridging the gap or if she was angling for something else. I replied with a short list: milk, bread, and the tea I like. An hour later, she was at my door with the bag in hand. She didn't linger that day, just handed me the groceries and said, "See you later, Grandma." But the next week, she came again, this time to sit for a while. She told me she'd applied for a part-time job at the local cafe. They said they like hiring students, she added, almost offhand, though I could hear the underlying pride. I nodded. It's good to work. Teaches you more than a classroom ever will. She rolled her eyes a little, but didn't argue. Over the next month, her visits became more regular. Sometimes she'd help me carry in firewood. Other times she'd just sit in the kitchen while I cooked, talking about school or her shifts at the cafe. It wasn't dramatic or overly sentimental, but there was a steadiness to it. Still, I kept my guard up. I've lived long enough to know that people can play nice when they want something. And while I wanted to believe she was growing, I wasn't ready to mistake short-term politeness for long-term change. One Saturday, she showed up with flour dusted on her sweater and a small box in her hands. "We baked extra muffins at work," she said, setting them on the counter. "I thought you might like some." I thanked her, and we sat at the table eating warm blueberry muffins straight from the box. It felt normal, not forced. That was when she looked up at me and said, "I've been saving my tips. I'm going to have enough for books when I go to community college." She said it matter-of-factly, like it was her plan, not a consolation prize. "That's good," I said, keeping my tone even. "Every bit counts." She hesitated, then added, "I know it's not the same as the trust fund, but I want to do it myself. I guess I never thought about what things cost before." It was the first time I'd heard her connect the dots between money and effort without prompting. I didn't shower her with praise. I simply said, "You'll value it more this way," and she nodded. Even Emily seemed to notice the difference. She called one evening to tell me, in a tone somewhere between grudging respect and mild disbelief, that Lily had started doing her own laundry and paying for her own gas. "I don't know if you scared her straight or what, but something's different," she said. "I didn't scare her," I replied. "I just stopped cushioning her from the truth." By the end of the school year, Lily had a small savings account she'd opened herself. She still had her teenage moments, rolling her eyes, being impatient, but there was a layer of awareness there now. I could see her thinking before she spoke, at least most of the time. I didn't reinstate the trust fund. I didn't even mention it. That was never the point. The point was that she was starting to learn what I'd known all my life, that respect isn't owed because of blood, and opportunity is a privilege you honor by how you treat others. Whether she realized it or not, that lesson was worth far more than any check I could have written. By summer, the sharp edges of that night had worn down, at least on the surface. Lily still had her circle of friends, her part-time job, and her teenage moods, but there was something new woven into the way she carried herself. A little more humility, a little less assumption that the world owed her its best, simply because she wanted it. We never had a big cinematic moment where she fell into my arms sobbing out an apology. Life doesn't usually work that way. Instead, the change came in increments. How she asked before borrowing something, how she thanked me without being prompted, how she looked me in the eye instead of over my shoulder. One late July evening, she stopped by after her shift, hair pulled back, the scent of coffee still clinging to her clothes. She set a small envelope on the table. "What's this?" I asked. "My first full paycheck," she said. "I wanted to show you before I deposit it. I earned it." I smiled. "And you should be proud. That's the start of your future, right there." She nodded, and for the first time I could see she believed it. Not in the abstract way she used to talk about college someday, but in the grounded, hands-in-the-dirt way that comes from knowing you've put in the hours yourself. We didn't talk about the trust fund. That subject stayed where I'd left it, closed, both in the bank and in my mind. It wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about letting the consequence do its work. From time to time, I'd catch Emily watching us with a curious expression, like she was still trying to decide whether I'd been cruel or wise. I didn't feel the need to explain myself to her. Parenting and grandparenting aren't about being liked every minute. They're about preparing someone for the life they'll have when you're no longer there to smooth the path. One Sunday in August, Lily came with me to the community center for the annual fundraising breakfast. As we worked side by side serving pancakes to the crowd, one of my friends leaned in and whispered, "She's a good helper." "She's learning," I said. Driving home afterward, Lily was quiet for a while, then said, "I know you think I've been doing all this to make up for that night. But it's not just that. I kind of like knowing I can do things myself. It feels different." I glanced at her, saw the faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "That's called pride in your own work," I said. "It lasts longer than any gift." When we pulled into my driveway, she grabbed the grocery bag from the back seat without me asking and carried it inside. Small things, yes, but they add up. That night, after she left, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the crickets and watching the sun dip behind the trees. I thought about Daniel, about how he'd always said we don't get to choose the lessons life hands us, but we can choose whether we learn them. I realized then that I didn't regret a single step I'd taken since that night at the Sweet 16. It had hurt. God, it had hurt to hear those words from her lips. But letting that hurt push me into action had changed something in both of us. I didn't know exactly what her future would look like. She might still make mistakes. She probably would. But now, she'd have something I could never buy for her. The understanding that love isn't measured in how much someone spends on you, but in how you treat them in return. And if that was the only inheritance I ever gave her, I knew it was enough. 3 years later, I sat in a folding chair under a white canopy on the high school football field, a program in my lap and the smell of fresh-cut grass in the air. The graduates, in their royal blue gowns and caps, streamed in to the sound of pomp and circumstance. Somewhere in the middle of that sea of tassels was Lily. She spotted me almost immediately, her eyes lighting up in a way that caught me off guard. She lifted her hand in a small wave, and I raised mine back. When it was her turn to walk across the stage, I watched her shoulders, straight, steady, without that restless fidgeting she used to have. She shook the principal's hand, took her diploma, and for just a second looked toward where I was sitting. Our eyes met. It wasn't long, but it was enough. After the ceremony, the crowd spilled onto the field in a happy, chaotic mess. Parents hugged their kids, cameras flashed, balloons bobbed in the warm breeze. I stayed back, letting Emily have her moment with her daughter. Eventually, Lily broke away and walked toward me, her cap tilted slightly, her tassel brushing her cheek. "Grandma," she said, a little breathless, "I wanted to give you something." Lee. She reached into the pocket of her gown and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a simple card with her handwriting. "Thank you for not making it easy." I looked up at her. She was smiling, but her eyes were damp. "I wouldn't be standing here if you hadn't made me figure things out for myself," she said. "I hated you for it at first. I get it now." I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let the weight of her words settle between us like something sacred. "You worked for this," I said finally. "No one can take it from you." She nodded. "I got into state. I've got scholarships, savings from the cafe, and, well, it's not the same path I thought I'd take, but it's mine." And there it was, the thing I'd hoped for all along, not just that she'd build a future, but that she'd take ownership of it. We stood there for another moment before Emily called her over for photos. Lily glanced back at me as she walked away, the corners of her mouth still curved upward. On the drive home, I thought about how different that moment felt from the night of her sweet 16. Back then, she'd had a microphone, an audience, and a joke at my expense. Now she'd had no stage, no performance, just a quiet truth she was ready to say out loud. I parked in my driveway, Sat for a moment with the engine off and let myself feel the full circle of it. The hurt had been real. The choice to cut her off had been hard. But the outcome, it was worth every bit of doubt I'd faced from others. Some people will always believe kindness means shielding others from consequences. I've learned that real kindness sometimes means stepping back and letting life do the teaching. The sun was low, casting that honeyed light across my front porch. I went inside, set the card on my kitchen table, and put the kettle on. As the water began to boil, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. Older, yes, but unshaken. Love, I realized, isn't just about giving. It's about giving in a way that lasts long after the money, the parties, and the applause are gone. And as far as I was concerned, that was the best gift I could have ever given her.